The moment I saw my son's name on the listing agreement, my chest shattered like glass. The daughter of the woman who once trusted him completely, now betrayed by her own blood. That morning was supposed to be a quiet walk through Central Park. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and I'm 73 years old. Every morning, I wake up in my $8 million Manhattan townhouse on East 72nd Street, 3 blocks from the park where my late husband David proposed 47 years ago. The walls are lined with photographs that once brought me joy, David and me laughing at Rockefeller Center during our first Christmas together, my children's tiny hands gripping mine as we climbed the steps of the Metropolitan Museum, family vacations in the Hamptons when love felt simple and unconditional. The scent of fresh lilacs from my rooftop garden mingles with the faint hum of traffic 8 floors below. Through my bedroom windows, I can see the skeletal branches of Central Park reaching toward a sky that always seems gray these days. But lately, my room feels heavier, burdened by silences I can't escape and conversations that echo with betrayal. That Tuesday morning in November, fog hugged the Manhattan skyline like a shroud. I tied my walking shoes, the same comfortable Reeboks I'd worn for 3 years of solitary morning walks. The routine had become my sanctuary, 6 in the morning sharp, through the park entrance at 5th Avenue. Past the reservoir where joggers moved like ghosts through the mist. I thought my son Simon would cherish this ritual when he asked to join me. 45 years old, with salt and pepper hair and the same green eyes that once looked at me with pure love. But that morning, as we walked past the Bethesda fountain, he casually dropped words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. "Mom, I need to list the house," he said, his voice as casual as if he were requesting a cup of coffee. I stopped walking. The fountain's gentle splash seemed to grow louder. "What house?" "Your house. This house. Our house." He gestured vaguely toward the direction of home. "The market's hot right now. 8 million, maybe 9 if we're lucky." The words hit me like ice water. "Simon, what are you talking about? I live there. It's my home." He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. Impatience. Calculation. The look of someone who had already made a decision and was simply informing me of the outcome. "Mom, you're getting older. You don't need all that space. We could find you a nice senior community, somewhere safer, more practical." I asked him why he thought he had the right to make such decisions. But he brushed me off with that slick smile I'd learned to dread, the one that appeared whenever he wanted something. "We'll talk about it later," he said, checking his phone. "I have a meeting." That afternoon, while Simon was supposedly at his meeting, I found myself drawn to my home office. Something nagged at me, a whisper of intuition I'd learned to ignore over the years of being told I was paranoid, overreacting, imagining things. I opened the mahogany desk that had belonged to David, running my fingers over the smooth wood where he used to write his letters. In the bottom drawer, underneath old tax returns and insurance papers, I found documents that shouldn't have been there. Real estate listing agreements. Market analysis reports. Property appraisals. And there, in stark black ink on the signature line of a preliminary sales contract, was my son's name. Simon Hartwell, acting as power of attorney for Eleanor Hartwell. I had never signed a power of attorney. I had never authorized him to act on my behalf. Yet there it was, my entire world reduced to dollar signs and square footage, my home treated like a commodity to be liquidated. My hands trembled as I flipped through page after page of documents planning the dismantling of my life. Estimates for moving companies. Brochures for assisted living facilities in New Jersey, places with names like Sunset Manor and Golden Years Community. Places where people went to wait for death. I sank into David's leather chair, the same chair where he used to read bedtime stories to Simon and his sister Emily when they were small. Where I used to sit and watch them play on the Persian rug, their laughter filling rooms that now felt hollow and cold. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about trust, about the sacred bond between mother and child that I thought nothing could break. But as I sat there surrounded by evidence of my son's deception, memories began flooding back like water through a broken dam. Memories I had pushed aside, explained away, forgiven time and time again because that's what mothers do. That's what good mothers do. I remember the first time Simon asked me for money. He was 28, fresh out of business school, full of dreams and ambitious plans. He needed seed money for a tech startup, something involving apps and social media that I didn't understand but wanted to support because I believed in him. $52,000. Just a loan, Mom. I'll pay you back within 6 months, with interest. The startup failed within 3 months. The money disappeared into a black hole of expenses and poor decisions. But Simon had explanations, always explanations. The market wasn't ready. His partner had betrayed him. The timing was wrong. I forgave him because that's what love does. Love forgives. Love hopes. Love believes in second chances. The second chance cost me $100,000. Then another $100,000 for a restaurant venture that closed before it ever opened. Then $200,000 for a real estate investment that turned out to be a scam. Each time, Simon would come to me with that boyish smile, those green eyes full of regret and promise. I know I messed up, Mom. But this time is different. This time I've learned from my mistakes. Each time, I would look at him and see the 5-year-old boy who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, who would bring me dandelions from the park and call them flowers for the most beautiful woman in the world. You're just being selfish, he'd say whenever I hesitated, whenever I dared to suggest that maybe he should take responsibility for his own mistakes. You have so much, and I'm struggling. I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The guilt was overwhelming. Here I sat in my beautiful townhouse, surrounded by luxury while my child faced hardship. What kind of mother wouldn't help? What kind of mother would choose money over her own flesh and blood? So I helped. Again and again and again. I drained my savings accounts, liquidated investments, borrowed against the house David had worked so hard to buy for us. I told myself it was temporary, that eventually Simon would find his footing and everything would be okay. But nothing was ever okay. The businesses failed, the investments crumbled, the promises turned to dust. And slowly, so slowly I barely noticed it happening, Simon's visits became less about seeing me and more about what he could take. He would arrive at my door with an armload of flowers and that charming smile. We would have dinner, catch up on family news, laugh at old stories. It felt like the relationship I had always dreamed of with my adult son. Then, just as he was leaving, he would mention his latest crisis. The rent was due. The car needed repairs. His credit cards were maxed out. I hate to ask, Mom. I know you've already done so much. But I don't know where else to turn. The conversations always followed the same pattern. First, the soft approach, the emotional manipulation disguised as vulnerability. Then, if I showed any resistance, the anger would surface. The cold stares. The accusations that I didn't really love him, that I cared more about money than family. You're sitting here in this huge house while your son struggles to keep a roof over his head, he'd say, his voice rising. Do you even hear yourself? Do you know how selfish you sound? The words cut deep because they echoed my own fears, my own guilt. Was I being selfish? Was I failing as a mother? The doubt crept in like poison, making me question everything I thought I knew about love and responsibility. I remember one particular evening, about 2 years ago, when Simon had stormed out after I refused to co-sign a loan for yet another business venture. I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by silence so thick it felt like drowning. The photographs on the mantel seemed to mock me, all those happy family memories now tainted with the bitter taste of manipulation. I called my daughter Emily, hoping for comfort, for perspective, for someone who might understand what I was going through. But Emily had her own opinions about the situation. You're enabling him, Mom, she said, her voice sharp with judgment. You keep giving him money, and he keeps failing because he knows you'll always bail him out. But he's my son, I protested. He's struggling. He's 43 years old, Mom. When does struggling become choosing? When does helping become hurting? Emily's words stung because they carried a truth I wasn't ready to face. But they also carried something else, something that hurt even more. Resentment. You gave him everything, she continued, her voice growing colder. College tuition, graduate school, all those failed businesses. What did I get? What did your daughter get? The accusation hung in the air between us like a living thing. It was true. I had given Simon more, much more. But not because I loved Emily less. Because Emily never asked. Emily was successful, independent, strong. She had built a good life for herself as a pediatric surgeon here in Manhattan, married to a wonderful man, raising 2 beautiful children. Simon was the one who needed me. Simon was the one who struggled. Simon was the one whose phone calls filled me with both joy and dread because I never knew which version of my son would be on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, I told Emily, though the words felt inadequate. I never meant to play favorites. I never meant to hurt you. I know, Mom, she said, her voice softening slightly. But intention doesn't erase impact. And the impact is that Simon has learned he doesn't have to be responsible for his own life because Mommy will always fix everything. After that conversation, I tried to set boundaries. I told Simon I couldn't keep funding his ventures. I suggested he find a stable job, build some financial security before chasing the next get-rich-quick scheme. His reaction was swift and brutal. The phone call stopped. The visits ended. Weeks went by without hearing from him, and the silence felt like punishment for daring to say no. Then, just when I thought I might lose my mind from worry, he would reappear. Usually in crisis, usually desperate, usually with just the right combination of apology and need to break down my resolve. "I've been thinking about what you said, Mom. You're right. I need to be more responsible. But I'm in trouble right now, real trouble. I might lose my apartment. I might end up on the street. I just need this one last favor, and then I swear I'll never ask again." The cycle continued. Crisis, rescue, brief peace, another crisis. Each time I told myself this would be the last time. Each time I found myself reaching for my checkbook, my heart breaking a little more with each signature. The financial experts I consulted were clear in their advice. Stop. Cut him off. Let him face the consequences of his choices. But they didn't understand what it felt like to be a mother. They didn't understand the weight of unconditional love, the impossible choice between helping and enabling, between compassion and wisdom. As I sat in David's chair that November afternoon, staring at the evidence of Simon's latest betrayal, all those years of doubt and self-recrimination crystallized into something harder, clearer. This wasn't love. This wasn't family. This was exploitation dressed up in the language of need and wrapped in the bow of biological connection. I thought about David, about what he would say if he were here. David, who had worked 16-hour days to build the construction company that afforded us this beautiful life. David, who had scrimped and saved and invested wisely so that I would be secure after he was gone. David, who had trusted me to be a good steward of everything we had built together. Would he understand the choices I had made? Would he forgive me for letting our life's work disappear into the endless pit of Simon's failures? I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly shoved the documents back into the drawer. Simon appeared in the doorway, still wearing his expensive suit, still carrying the leather briefcase I had bought him for his last birthday. "How was your meeting?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Good. Really good. I think this deal is going to change everything for me, Mom." He sat down in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where he used to do homework as a child. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you about the house. This opportunity requires some capital, and if we could free up the equity in your property." He continued talking, outlining his plan with the confidence of someone who had never doubted that I would go along with whatever he proposed. But I wasn't really listening to his words. I was watching his face, studying the features that had once seemed so familiar and beloved. When had he become a stranger? When had my sweet, sensitive boy turned into this calculating man who could forge documents and plan the sale of my home while looking me in the eye and calling it love? "I need to think about it," I said when he finished his pitch. Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or annoyance. He wasn't used to me needing time to think. Usually, I either said yes immediately or gave in after a brief show of resistance. "What's to think about, Mom? You're 73 years old. You don't need a house this big. You barely use half the rooms." "It's my home, Simon. It's an asset, Mom. A really expensive asset that's doing nothing but costing you money in taxes and maintenance. You could be comfortable somewhere smaller, somewhere safer. And the money from the sale could secure your future." "My future." I repeated the words, tasting their bitter irony. "And what role do you play in securing this future of mine?" "I'm your son," he said, as if that explained everything. As if those 3 words gave him the right to make decisions about my life, my home, my future. That night, after Simon left, I sat alone in my kitchen with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The house felt enormous around me, every room echoing with memories that now seemed tainted. Had any of it been real? Had any of his love been genuine, or had I always been nothing more than a source of funds? I thought about Emily's accusations, about the years of enabling and rescuing and making excuses. I thought about David's disappointed face if he could see what I had allowed our family to become. I thought about the 18-year-old girl I had been when David and I first met, full of dreams and confidence, certain that love was enough to conquer any challenge. That girl never could have imagined this moment, this betrayal, this crushing weight of realization that sometimes the people we love most are the ones capable of hurting us deepest. But she also never could have imagined the strength that comes from facing the truth, no matter how painful. The clarity that emerges when you stop making excuses and start seeing things as they really are. I went to bed that night with a decision forming in my heart, fragile as a new seedling but growing stronger with each passing hour. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't continue down this path of endless giving and taking, this one-sided relationship disguised as love. The next morning brought a December snowfall, the first of the season. I watched from my bedroom window as Central Park transformed into a winter wonderland, the bare trees now draped in white like lace curtains. The city looked clean and new, full of possibility. I made coffee and toast, simple pleasures I had learned to savor in my years of living alone. The kitchen was my favorite room in the house, warm and welcoming with copper pots hanging from hooks and herbs growing on the windowsill. David and I had designed it together, choosing every tile and cabinet knob, dreaming of family dinners and holiday gatherings. The phone rang as I was finishing my breakfast. Simon's name appeared on the caller ID, and I felt my stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. But this time, something was different. This time, I let it ring. The voicemail he left was typical Simon. Urgent, dramatic, designed to inspire immediate action. "Mom, it's me. I need to talk to you right away. There's been a development with the house situation, and we need to move quickly. Call me back as soon as you get this." The house situation. As if my home, my life, my future had been reduced to a situation to be managed. I deleted the message without calling back. An hour later, he called again. Then again. By noon, my phone showed 6 missed calls and 4 increasingly frantic voicemails. Each one more demanding than the last, the thin veneer of politeness gradually giving way to the anger that lurked just beneath Simon's charming surface. "Mom, why aren't you answering your phone? This is important. We have buyers interested, serious buyers, but they want to move fast. Don't you understand what an opportunity this is?" The final voicemail dropped all pretense of asking for my permission or input. "Mom, I'm coming over. We're going to settle this today. I've already started the paperwork, and there are deadlines we have to meet. You can't just ignore this." I sat in my living room, surrounded by the beautiful things David and I had collected over 47 years of marriage. Persian rugs we had bought on our anniversary trip to Istanbul. A Steinway piano that filled the room with music when Emily still lived at home. Original paintings by artists whose names I couldn't pronounce but whose work spoke to my heart. Each piece told a story. Each object held a memory. This wasn't just a house, just an asset to be liquidated. This was the repository of my life, the place where I had loved and been loved, where I had raised my children and buried my husband and learned to live alone without losing myself completely. When Simon arrived that afternoon, I was ready for him. I had spent the morning on the phone with my attorney, a sharp woman named Margaret Chen who had handled David's estate and had been warning me for years about Simon's financial requests. "Mrs. Hartwell," she had said that morning, her voice gentle but firm. "You need to understand that what your son is doing is not legal. He cannot sell your house without your explicit written consent. He cannot act as your power of attorney without proper documentation. What you're describing sounds like fraud." The word had hit me like a physical blow. Fraud. My son wasn't just making poor financial decisions or asking for too much help. He was committing crimes, using my name, forging my signature, planning to steal my home. "What should I do?" I had asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "First, we secure all your assets. Change passwords, freeze accounts, revoke any access he might have. Then we confront him with the facts and make it clear that any further attempts to act without your consent will result in legal action." Legal action. Against my own son. The mother in me recoiled from the idea, but the woman who had been betrayed and deceived knew it might be the only language Simon would understand. When he walked into my living room that December afternoon, I was sitting in the same chair where I had rocked him to sleep as a baby, where I had comforted him through nightmares and broken hearts and disappointments. But the man standing before me bore little resemblance to that vulnerable child. "Finally," he said, setting his briefcase on my coffee table without asking. "I was starting to think something had happened to you. We need to sign these papers today, Mom. The buyers are getting impatient." "What buyers?" I asked. He looked at me as if I were being deliberately obtuse. "The buyers for the house. The ones I told you about. The ones who are willing to pay top dollar if we move quickly." "I never agreed to sell the house, Simon." "Well, no, not officially. But we discussed it. You know it makes sense. You know you can't keep living here alone." The conversation felt surreal, like watching a play where everyone had been given different scripts. Simon was proceeding as if my consent was a foregone conclusion, as if my agreement was simply a procedural formality rather than a fundamental requirement. "I found the documents," I said quietly. "The ones in my desk. The ones with your signature, claiming to act as my power of attorney." For just a moment, his confident facade cracked. I saw surprise, fear, calculation flash across his face before the smooth mask slipped back into place. "Mom, I can explain that. I was just getting the paperwork ready in case you decided to move forward. I wasn't going to do anything without your permission. You forged my signature, Simon." "I didn't forge anything. I was just preparing. Making sure everything would be ready if you decided to sell." The lies came so easily, so smoothly, that I wondered how long he had been practicing this particular brand of deception. How many other documents existed that I didn't know about? How many other plans had been made in my name, for my property, with my assets? I want you to leave, I said, the words coming from some deep place of strength I didn't know I possessed. Mom, don't be ridiculous. We need to finish this conversation. We need to make some decisions. I've made my decision. I'm not selling the house. I'm not leaving my home. And I want you to leave. Now. Simon stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. This wasn't how our conversations usually went. Usually, I would listen to his arguments, express my concerns, and eventually find myself persuaded or worn down into agreement. You're being irrational, he said, his voice taking on an edge of condescension I had learned to hate. You're 73 years old, Mom. You can't take care of this place by yourself. What happens when you fall down those stairs? What happens when you can't remember to lock the doors? What happens when you need help and there's nobody here? The questions were designed to frighten me, to make me doubt my own competence and independence. They were the same questions I asked myself late at night when the house felt too big and too quiet, when my arthritis flared and simple tasks became difficult. But hearing them from Simon's lips, spoken as weapons rather than concerns, stripped them of their power to terrorize me. What happens when I need help, I repeated slowly, is that I'll ask for it. From people who care about me. From people who don't see me as a problem to be solved or an asset to be liquidated. I care about you, Mom. You're my mother. Everything I'm trying to do is for your own good. No, Simon. Everything you're trying to do is for your own good. My good would involve asking me what I want, respecting my decisions, treating me like a human being instead of a checkbook. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a harsh sound that seemed to echo through the room. Fine. Be stubborn. Be foolish. But don't come crying to me when you realize you can't handle living here alone. As he stalked toward the door, he turned back with one final shot. You know what your problem is, Mom? You're selfish. You have all this wealth, all this space, and you refuse to share it with your own family. Emily is right about you. The mention of Emily stung more than I expected. What did Emily say? That you play favorites. That you give me money but never offer to help her with anything. That you act generous but you're really just controlling. He smiled, cruel and calculated. She thinks you're losing your mind, by the way. Living alone in this big house, talking to your dead husband's pictures, making decisions based on paranoid fantasies. The words hit their target exactly as intended. All my fears about aging, about loneliness, about becoming the crazy old woman my children humored but didn't respect. Simon knew my vulnerabilities, knew which buttons to press to reduce me to a trembling mess of doubt and self-recrimination. But this time, instead of crushing me, his cruelty clarified everything. This was who my son really was. This was how he really saw me. Not as a mother to be cherished, but as an opponent to be defeated, an obstacle to be removed from his path to my money. Get out, I said, my voice steady and clear. Get out of my house and don't come back until you're ready to treat me with respect. He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Respect? You want respect? Then act like someone who deserves it. The front door slammed behind him with such force that the windows rattled. I stood in my empty living room, listening to my heartbeat, waiting for the familiar wave of guilt and regret to wash over me. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, peace. Pure, clean, uncomplicated peace. That evening, I called Emily. Not to complain about Simon or to seek her support in our conflict, but to apologize for the ways I had failed her, the favoritism she had rightfully called out, the imbalance in how I had treated my children. Emily, I need to tell you something, I began, my hands trembling slightly as I held the phone. I owe you an apology. There was silence on the other end, then a cautious, for what, Mom? For treating you and Simon differently. For giving him money and opportunities one never offered you. For making you feel like you had to earn my love while he got it automatically. I heard Emily's sharp intake of breath. This wasn't the conversation she had been expecting. Mom, I don't understand. Why are you saying this now? I told her about the documents, about Simon's plan to sell the house without my consent, about the years of financial manipulation disguised as familial need. I told her about the realizations that had been building in my heart like pressure in a kettle, finally finding release in honesty. Oh, Mom, Emily said, her voice soft with something that sounded like compassion. I'm so sorry. I had no idea it had gotten that bad. You tried to warn me, I admitted. You told me I was enabling him, and I got defensive. I thought you were being harsh, unsympathetic. But you were right. Being right doesn't make this any easier, she said. He's still my brother. You're still my mother. This is still our family. I know. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if it can be fixed. We talked for over an hour, mother and daughter having the kind of honest conversation we should have had years ago. Emily told me about her own struggles with resentment and jealousy, her feelings of being the responsible child who got taken for granted while Simon got coddled and rescued. I built my whole identity around being the good daughter, she said. The one who didn't need anything, who never caused problems, who had her life together. But sometimes I felt invisible. Sometimes I wanted to fail spectacularly just to get the kind of attention you gave him. Her words broke my heart because they revealed the subtle ways I had damaged both of my children. By rescuing Simon, I had taught him that love meant never facing consequences. By expecting Emily to be strong and independent, I had taught her that love had to be earned through perfection. I love you both, I told her, tears streaming down my cheeks. I love you both so much, but I think I forgot how to show love in healthy ways. We can learn, Emily said. All of us. We can learn to be better. But learning would have to wait. The next morning brought a crisis that pushed our family dynamics to the breaking point and forced me to confront just how far Simon was willing to go to get what he wanted. I woke to find my online banking accounts frozen, my credit cards cancelled, and a voice message from my bank's fraud department asking me to call immediately to verify some unusual activity on my accounts. The customer service representative was professional but concerned. Mrs. Hartwell, we've had several requests to transfer large sums of money from your accounts, as well as attempts to add an authorized user to your credit cards. The documentation provided appears to contain some irregularities. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. What kind of irregularities? The signatures don't match our records, and the power of attorney document appears to have been altered. We've frozen your accounts as a precaution, but you'll need to come in person to sort this out. I spent that entire day at the bank, then at my lawyer's office, then at the police station. Each stop revealed another layer of Simon's deception, another document forged, another attempt to access my money without my knowledge or consent. The police detective was a kind woman named Detective Rodriguez who specialized in elder financial abuse. She looked at me with eyes full of compassion and experience as she explained what Simon had been doing. This is more common than you might think, Mrs. Hartwell. Adult children who see their parents' assets as their inheritance, available for immediate use rather than future inheritance. The emotional component makes it particularly devastating. What happens now? I asked. That depends on you. We have enough evidence to file charges, but prosecuting family members is complicated. Many victims choose not to press charges because they don't want to send their own children to prison. Prison. My son in prison. The thought was unthinkable, unbearable, impossible to process. But so was the alternative. If I did nothing, if I forgave and forgot and went back to the old patterns, what message would that send? That his actions had no consequences? That my rights as a human being mattered less than his comfort as my son? I need time to think, I told Detective Rodriguez. Of course. But Mrs. Hartwell, please understand that this pattern tends to escalate. If he's willing to forge documents and commit fraud now, what might he be willing to do next time he needs money? I drove home through Manhattan streets that seemed unfamiliar, as if I were seeing my own city through different eyes. The townhouse that had been my sanctuary for so many years felt like a fortress under siege, beautiful but vulnerable. That evening, Simon called. Not my cell phone, which he knew I would recognize and might not answer, but my landline, the old rotary phone that had been in the kitchen since David and I first moved in. Mom, we need to talk, he said without preamble. I know you're upset, but you're blowing this way out of proportion. Blowing what out of proportion, Simon? The fraud? The forgery? The attempts to steal my money? I wasn't stealing anything. I was trying to help you manage your finances. You're getting older, Mom. You make mistakes. You forget things. I was just trying to protect you. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost doubted my own perceptions. Was I overreacting? Was I being paranoid? Were my concerns legitimate, or was I really losing my grip on reality? But then I remembered Detective Rodriguez's words about escalation, about patterns of abuse that grow worse over time. I remembered the documents in my desk drawer, the calculated deception, the way Simon had looked at me when he talked about selling my house. Simon, you forged my signature. You tried to access my bank accounts without permission. You made plans to sell my house without my consent. That's not helping. That's stealing. God, Mom, you're so dramatic. I was preparing for contingencies. I was making sure that if something happened to you, your affairs would be in order. I was being responsible. Being responsible would mean talking to me, asking for my input, respecting my wishes. Being responsible would mean treating me like an adult capable of making my own decisions. There was a long pause, and when Simon spoke again, his voice had changed. The fake concern and manipulation were gone, replaced by cold anger. Fine. You want to be independent? You want to make your own decisions? Good luck when you fall down those stairs and there's no one there to help you. Good luck when you forget to pay your bills and they shut off your electricity. Good luck when you need someone, anyone, to give a damn about what happens to you. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the dial tone and the echo of his words. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through my house, touching familiar objects, looking at old photographs, trying to make sense of how my family had reached this point of breakdown and betrayal. I thought about calling Emily, but she was dealing with her own family crisis. Her youngest daughter had been diagnosed with a learning disability, and Emily was spending her evenings researching schools and therapies and ways to help her child succeed. I thought about calling one of my few remaining friends, but what would I say? That my son was stealing from me? That my family was disintegrating? That I was 73 years old and completely alone in the world? Instead, I found myself in David's study, sitting in his leather chair, surrounded by his books and papers and the lingering scent of his cologne. I pulled out a photo album I hadn't looked at in years, filled with pictures from when the children were young. Simon at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing he had made me for Mother's Day. Emily at 7, serious and determined, concentrating on a chess game with her father. Family vacations to Cape Cod, birthday parties in this very living room, Christmas mornings that seemed to last forever. When had it all gone wrong? When had love turned into manipulation, family into transaction, home into something to be liquidated? I must have fallen asleep in David's chair, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of someone pounding on my front door. It was Simon, but not the polished, charming version I was used to dealing with. This Simon was disheveled, unshaven, wild-eyed with desperation or drugs or whatever cocktail of substances he used to cope with his failures. "Mom, you have to help me," he said the moment I opened the door. "I'm in trouble. Real trouble this time." Against my better judgment, I let him in. He looked thin and pale, older than his 45 years, worn down by whatever crisis had brought him to my doorstep. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "I owe money. A lot of money. To people who don't accept 'I'll pay you next week' as an answer." "How much money?" 200,000. Maybe 250 by now with interest. The number was staggering, even by Simon's standards. "What did you do?" "I made some investments. Some bets. I was so sure they would pay off, Mom. I was so sure this time would be different." "Gambling." My son had become a gambler, and not just casually. Seriously, destructively, dangerously. "Simon, I can't help you with this." "I won't help you with this. You need professional help. Treatment. Therapy. I need money, Mom. They're going to hurt me. They're going to kill me." The desperation in his voice was real, the fear genuine. But I had heard similar pleas before, smaller versions of the same story. Crisis, consequences, rescue. The cycle that had defined our relationship for 20 years. Then you need to go to the police. You need to get protection, witness relocation, whatever it takes to get you away from these people safely. The police can't help me. Money can help me. Your money can help me. And there it was, the bottom line that had always defined our relationship. My money. Not my love, not my support, not my wisdom or guidance. My money. "No," I said quietly. "I won't do it." Simon stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. In all his years of coming to me with problems and needs and emergencies, I had never given him a flat, unequivocal no. "Mom, you don't understand. These people will kill me." "Then you need to find another solution. You need to take responsibility for the choices you've made." His face changed, hardening into an expression I had never seen before. Ugly and desperate and threatening. "I know about the house documents," he said. "I know you think you're so smart, freezing the accounts, talking to lawyers. But there are other ways to get what I need." The threat hung in the air between us like a living thing. My own son, threatening me in my own home, making it clear that he would take what he wanted one way or another. "Get out," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Mom, get out, or I'm calling the police." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something die in his eyes. Whatever love or respect or familial bond had existed between us withered and disappeared, replaced by calculation and contempt. "This isn't over," he said as he headed for the door. "You can't protect that money forever. You're old, Mom. Old and alone. Accidents happen to old people who live alone." The words chilled me to the bone, but I refused to let him see my fear. I locked the door behind him and immediately called Detective Rodriguez. Within an hour, my living room was full of police officers taking statements and photographs, treating my home like a crime scene because that's what it had become. "We can arrest him for making threats," Detective Rodriguez told me. "But unless you're willing to press charges for the financial crimes as well, he'll probably be back on the street within 24 hours. I thought about Simon as a little boy, about the promises David and I had made when he was born to love and protect him always. I thought about family loyalty and unconditional love and all the reasons mothers make excuses for their children's behavior. But I also thought about the fear in his eyes when he threatened me, about the cold calculation that had replaced any semblance of filial affection. This wasn't my little boy anymore. This was a dangerous man who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. "File the charges," I told Detective Rodriguez. "All of them." The arrest happened the next day. I wasn't there to see it, but Emily called to tell me that Simon had been taken into custody outside his apartment building. The news would be in the papers, she warned me. Financial elder abuse cases involving wealthy families always attracted media attention. I spent that morning fielding phone calls from reporters, from neighbors, from people I barely knew who had heard the news and wanted to express their shock and sympathy. Everyone wanted to know how I was coping, what I was going to do, whether I would ever be able to forgive my son. I didn't have answers to most of their questions. I was operating on instinct and adrenaline, making decisions moment by moment without any clear plan for the future. Emily came to see me that evening, bringing Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine from the little liquor store on Lexington Avenue that David used to patronize. "How are you holding up, Mom?" she asked as we sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the familiar comfort of home. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I keep waiting to feel something. Guilt, regret, devastation. But mostly I just feel empty." "Maybe empty is good," Emily said. "Maybe empty means you finally stopped filling yourself up with his problems and his needs and his crises." We ate in comfortable silence, two women processing an impossible situation in their own ways. Finally, Emily spoke again. "I'm proud of you, Mom." The words surprised me. "For what? For destroying our family? For sending my son to prison? For choosing yourself? For deciding that your safety and dignity matter more than keeping peace in the family? For refusing to be a victim anymore?" Victim? I had never thought of myself that way. I was Simon's mother, his helper, his rescuer. But maybe Emily was right. Maybe I had been a victim all along, just too conditioned to the role to recognize it. The next few months were the hardest of my life since David's death. Simon was released on bail pending trial, but a restraining order kept him away from me and my property. Emily and I began seeing a family therapist together, trying to understand how our relationships had become so dysfunctional and whether they could be healed. I learned about something called parentification, where children are forced to take on adult responsibilities too early, and I realized that I had done that to Emily by expecting her to be strong and independent while Simon got to remain a child indefinitely. I learned about enabling, about the difference between helping and hurting, about how my good intentions had contributed to Simon's inability to function as an adult. Most painfully, I learned about trauma bonding, about how victims often develop intense attachments to their abusers because the cycle of crisis and rescue creates artificial intimacy. Had I become traumatically bonded to my own son? Was that why I found it so hard to let go, even when he was clearly taking advantage of me? The questions were uncomfortable, but they were also liberating. Understanding the psychology behind our family dynamics helped me see that I wasn't stupid or weak for falling into these patterns. I was human, and humans are wired to love their children even when those children hurt them. But understanding my motivations didn't mean I had to continue the same behaviors. I could love Simon from a distance. I could hope for his recovery without funding his destruction. I could protect myself without feeling guilty about it. Spring came early that year, and with it, a surprising development. Simon's lawyer contacted me to arrange a meeting, not to discuss the criminal charges, but to negotiate a different kind of resolution. My client would like to enter a plea agreement, the lawyer explained. In exchange for pleading guilty to the financial fraud charges, he would like to propose a family reconciliation plan that includes mandatory addiction treatment and supervised contact moving forward. Addiction treatment. So gambling wasn't Simon's only problem. There were substances involved, which explained the dramatic deterioration in his appearance and behavior over the past year. "What kind of treatment?" I asked. "Inpatient rehabilitation for gambling addiction and substance abuse. 6 months minimum, possibly longer depending on his progress. He would have no access to money, credit, or financial instruments during treatment. All contact with family members would be supervised and therapeutic. It wasn't the reunion I had dreamed of, but it was better than nothing. It was a chance for Simon to get the help he needed, and for our family to heal in a structured, safe environment. I agreed to the plea arrangement, with conditions. Simon would serve his time in treatment rather than prison, but he would also be required to make financial restitution for the money he had attempted to steal. He would have no access to my accounts, my property, or my financial information ever again. And any future contact between us would be contingent on his maintaining sobriety and continuing therapy. The day Simon entered treatment, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness that was hard to describe. Relief that the crisis was over, that I was safe, that he was getting help. Sadness that it had taken criminal charges and legal intervention to get us to this point. Emily and I visited him after he had been in treatment for a month. The facility was beautiful, set on rolling hills outside the city, designed to feel more like a retreat than an institution. Simon looked better than he had in years. Clean, rested, clear-eyed for the first time in longer than I could remember. But there was also a fragility about him, like someone who had been broken and was learning to put himself back together one piece at a time. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly when I entered the family therapy room. "Thank you for coming." We spent an hour talking with his counselor about the patterns that had damaged our relationship, about the enabling and manipulation and mutual dysfunction that had passed for love in our family. Simon acknowledged, for the first time, that he had been using me. Not just for money, but emotionally, taking advantage of my maternal instincts to avoid facing the consequences of his choices. "I told myself I deserved your help because I was struggling," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I told myself you owed it to me because you were my mother. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of failing, scared of being responsible for my own life, scared of growing up. And it was easier to keep coming to you than to face my fears." I cried during that session, not tears of sadness but of relief. This was my son talking, really talking, maybe for the first time in years. Not manipulating or performing or trying to get something from me, but honestly examining his own behavior and its impact on our family. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said as our time was ending. "I'm sorry for hurting you, for using you, for making you afraid in your own home. I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I want to try." The apology didn't erase the damage, but it was a start. It was acknowledgement, accountability, the beginning of whatever healing might be possible between us. Over the following months, as Simon progressed through treatment and Emily and I continued our own therapy, I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been dormant for years. I started painting again, something I had loved in college but abandoned when the children were young and life became consumed with their needs. I joined a book club at the local library, surrounding myself with women whose conversations didn't revolve around crisis and rescue and endless need. I traveled, taking a cruise to Alaska that I had been dreaming about for years but never allowed myself because what if Simon needed me? What if there was an emergency? What if my money was needed for some urgent family situation? The cruise was magnificent. Glaciers and whales and sunsets that took my breath away. I met interesting people, ate wonderful food, slept through the night without worrying about phone calls or emergencies or the next crisis that would demand my immediate attention and financial intervention. For the first time in decades, I felt free. Emily and I grew closer during this period, building the kind of adult relationship we had never been able to have when our family dynamics were centered around managing Simon's needs. "You seem different, Mom," she told me one afternoon as we shared lunch at a little cafe near her hospital. "Lighter. More yourself." "I feel more myself," I admitted. "I feel like I remembered who I was before I became defined by being Simon's mother and David's widow." "Who are you?" she asked, genuinely curious. It was a good question, one I hadn't asked myself in years. Who was Eleanor Hartwell when she wasn't responding to someone else's crisis or need or demand? I was someone who loved art and literature and travel. Someone who enjoyed conversations about books and politics and ideas. Someone who found peace in quiet mornings and satisfaction in simple pleasures. Someone who had opinions and preferences and boundaries. Someone who deserved respect and consideration and love that didn't come with strings attached. Simon was released from treatment after 8 months, looking healthier than I had seen him since his 20s. He had gained weight, reconnected with old friends who weren't involved in gambling or substances, and found a job doing construction work that reminded him of the summers he had spent working for David's company as a teenager. Our first unsupervised visit happened on a Saturday afternoon in Central Park, the same place where he had first told me about his plan to sell my house. But this conversation was different. He was different. "How are you doing, Mom?" he asked, and I could tell he was genuinely interested in the answer, not just asking out of obligation or as a prelude to a request. "I'm doing well," I told him honestly. "Better than I've been in years." "Good. That's good." I'm glad. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching children play on the playground, couples sharing picnics on the grass, the normal rhythms of life continuing around us. I think about that day a lot, Simon said eventually. The day I told you about selling the house. I think about how arrogant I was, how entitled. Like your life was just something that existed for my benefit. What would you do differently? I asked. I would have asked you what you wanted. I would have listened to your answer. I would have respected your right to make your own decisions about your own life. It was the response I had been hoping to hear, but it also carried the weight of all the years when those words wouldn't have occurred to him, when my wants and needs and preferences were invisible to him. Do you think we can rebuild our relationship? I asked. I hope so, he said. But I understand if you don't trust me. I understand if you need more time or space or conditions I'm not ready to meet yet. I understand that forgiveness isn't the same thing as forgetting, and that earning back trust takes a lot longer than breaking it. Those words, that understanding, meant more to me than any apology or promise. They showed me that Simon was beginning to grasp the reality of consequences, the weight of his actions, the work required to repair what he had broken. We began having lunch once a month, then every 2 weeks, gradually rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than crisis. Simon never asked me for money. He never hinted at financial difficulties or suggested ways I could help him. He talked about his job, his therapy, his struggles with staying sober, his efforts to make amends to other people he had hurt. Slowly, carefully, I began to trust that this version of my son might be real and lasting. But the real test came almost a year after his release from treatment, when he called me one evening with news that made my heart race with familiar anxiety. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice tight with stress. "I lost my job today." My first instinct was to ask why, to offer help, to start solving his problem before he had even finished explaining it. But therapy had taught me to pause, to breathe, to respond rather than react. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "That must be very stressful for you." "It is. I'm scared. Not just about money, but about what this might do to my recovery. Work has been a big part of staying stable." I waited for him to ask for money, for a loan, for me to make phone calls to get him another job. But the request never came. "I have some savings," he continued. "Enough to cover rent and food for a few months while I look for something else. And my sponsor says there are other construction companies hiring. I probably won't be unemployed for long." "That sounds like a good plan," I said, genuinely proud of him for having savings, for having a plan, for handling a crisis without automatically turning to me for rescue. "I just wanted you to know," he said. "In case I seem stressed when we have lunch next week. I didn't want you to worry, but I also didn't want to hide what was going on." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen marveling at the conversation we had just had. My son had faced a setback and had handled it like an adult. He had shared his feelings without making them my responsibility. He had reassured me without asking for anything in return. This was what a healthy relationship looked like. This was what love looked like when it wasn't twisted by dependency and manipulation and fear. Simon found new employment within 3 weeks, with a company that paid better and offered benefits. More importantly, he had navigated the crisis without compromising his recovery or reverting to old patterns of behavior. Emily noticed the changes in our family dynamics too. "It's like we're all learning to be different people," she observed during one of our monthly dinners. "Learning to relate to each other as adults instead of as characters in some dysfunctional family drama." She was right. We were all different people than we had been 2 years earlier. Simon was becoming responsible and self-aware. Emily was learning to express her needs instead of simply being the good daughter who never caused problems. And I was remembering who I was beyond my roles as mother and widow. The changes weren't always easy. There were moments when I missed the intensity of the old patterns, the feeling of being needed, the sense that I was essential to someone's survival. There were times when Simon's independence made me feel useless, when Emily's emotional boundaries made me feel shut out. But those moments passed, replaced by something steadier and more sustainable. Relationships based on choice rather than obligation. Love that didn't require crisis to express itself. Family connections rooted in respect and genuine affection rather than guilt and manipulation. On the 2nd anniversary of Simon's arrest, I did something I never thought I would do. I threw a party. Not a big celebration, just a small gathering in my living room. Emily and her family, Simon and his girlfriend, a lovely woman he had met in a support group, Mrs. Chen, my attorney, Detective Rodriguez who had become a friend, and a few neighbors who had supported me through the darkest months of family crisis. As I looked around my living room, filled with people who cared about me for who I was rather than what I could provide, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not for the trauma my family had endured, but for the growth that had emerged from it. Simon proposed a toast. To second chances, he said, raising his glass. To learning from our mistakes. To families that can heal and change and become better versions of themselves. To boundaries, Emily added with a smile. To saying no when we need to. To asking for help when we need it. To loving each other enough to tell the truth. To courage, I said, surprising myself. To the courage to change things that aren't working, even when change is scary. To the courage to protect ourselves, even from people we love. To the courage to hope for something better. We clinked glasses and drank, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my living room with a cup of tea and a photo album. But instead of the old pictures that had once brought me pain, I was looking at new memories. Photos from my Alaska cruise, from Emily's daughter's birthday party, from the art class I had joined, from Simon's one-year sobriety celebration. These pictures told a different story. Not a story of loss and betrayal and manipulation, but a story of recovery and growth and the possibility of redemption. My phone rang, and I saw Emily's name on the caller ID. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered. "Hi, Mom. I just wanted to thank you for tonight. For the party, but also for everything. For doing the hard work of changing our family. For teaching us all that we could be better than we were. Thank you for forgiving me," I said. "For giving me the chance to learn how to be a better mother. You were always a good mother, Mom. You just loved us so much that you forgot to love yourself. I'm glad you remembered." After we hung up, I walked through my house, touching familiar objects, looking at rooms where so much pain and joy had unfolded over the years. This was still my home, my sanctuary, my refuge. But it was no longer a place where I waited for the next crisis, the next demand, the next opportunity to prove my love through sacrifice. It was a place where I lived fully, where I pursued my own interests, where I welcomed people who treated me with respect and affection. A place where I had learned to say yes to things that brought me joy and no to things that diminished me. I thought about David, about what he would think of the woman I had become. I think he would be proud. Not just of my strength in facing Simon's betrayal, but of my wisdom in recognizing that love sometimes requires boundaries, that helping sometimes means stepping back, that family bonds are strongest when they're based on mutual respect rather than need. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was lined with age and marked by experience, but it was also peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. I had learned something precious in my 74 years, that we teach people how to treat us, and that it's never too late to insist on being treated well. That love without respect is not really love at all. That we cannot save people who don't want to be saved, but we can always save ourselves. That night, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, like someone who had laid down a burden she had been carrying for too long. The next morning brought sunshine and the first hints of spring warmth. I made coffee and toast, simple pleasures I had learned to savor. I read the newspaper, tended my rooftop garden, answered emails from friends I was planning to visit. At 10 o'clock, my doorbell rang. It was Simon, but not the desperate, manipulative version I had dealt with for so many years. This was the man he was becoming, steady, responsible, genuinely concerned about my well-being. "Hi, Mom. I was in the neighborhood and wondered if you'd like to take a walk in the park." I looked at him carefully, searching for hidden agendas or ulterior motives. But all I saw was my son, clean and sober and present, offering to spend time with me simply because he enjoyed my company. "I'd love to," I said. We walked through Central Park on a perfect spring morning, talking about books and current events and his girlfriend's new job. Normal conversation between two adults who happened to be related, who had chosen to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. At one point, we stopped at the same bench where he had first told me about his plan to sell my house. But instead of betrayal and manipulation, this conversation was filled with gratitude and wonder. "I almost destroyed everything," Simon said, looking out at the lake where couples were rowing boats in the sunshine. "Our relationship, your trust, your sense of safety in your own home. I almost threw it all away for money that wouldn't have solved any of my real problems anyway." "But you didn't," I reminded him. "You stopped. You got help. You chose to change instead of continuing down that path. Because you made me change. Because you loved me enough to say no, to let me face consequences, to risk our relationship rather than enable my destruction." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching families play frisbee on the grass, listening to street musicians playing jazz near the fountain. "I love you, Mom," Simon said eventually. "Not because of what you can give me or do for me, but because you're you. Because you're wise and strong and brave enough to do hard things when they need to be done." "I love you too," I told him, and meant it completely. Not the person you used to be, and not the person you might become someday, but the person you are right now. The person who chose recovery over addiction, honesty over manipulation, growth over staying stuck in old patterns. We hugged there on the bench, a real hug filled with genuine affection rather than the desperate clinging I remembered from our old relationship. As we walked home together, I thought about how different this moment was from that terrible morning 2 years earlier when I had discovered his betrayal. Same park, same sun, same mother. But everything else had changed. The fear was gone. The anger had transformed into understanding. The manipulation had been replaced by authentic connection. Most importantly, I had learned that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for them. It means caring enough to insist that they become their best selves, even if that process is painful for everyone involved. Have you ever lived, or known someone who lived, something like this? Have you found yourself in a relationship where love became confused with giving, where helping became enabling, where family loyalty meant accepting unacceptable behavior? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, your journey toward health and boundaries matters, your courage to change difficult family dynamics matters. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that it's never too late to insist on being treated with respect, if it gave you hope that even damaged relationships can heal when the right work is done, please like this video and subscribe to help me keep sharing these important messages. Together, we can remind each other that love is not supposed to hurt, that family is not supposed to be a source of constant crisis, that we all deserve relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Together, we can keep opening our hearts to the possibility of healing, growth, and the kind of love that actually nurtures rather than diminishes us. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of people who believe in second chances, healthy boundaries, and the courage to create the relationships we truly deserve.